My dad punched my husband at the reception. The moment my father threw his punch, the sound of laughter in the hall died like someone had cut the music. The band stopped mid-note, champagne glasses froze halfway to lips, and the flash of cameras turned into silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I had dreamed of this day since I was a child, but I never imagined I would be standing in my wedding dress watching my dad and my new husband fight in front of everyone I loved. Looking back, the signs had always been there. My dad never liked Michael. He said Michael was too cocky, too quick with a smirk, too eager to talk about himself. I told him it was just his protective instincts, that no man would ever be good enough for his daughter. But the warnings never stopped. Every time Michael came around, Dad would grill him about his job, his future plans, even the way he looked at me. He said Michael wasn't serious, that he was just playing house until something better came along. I didn't want to hear it. Michael wasn't innocent either. He thought my dad was controlling. He said he had never met someone so obsessed with me that it felt like Dad wanted to keep me as his little girl forever. Sometimes he even joked that marrying me meant marrying into a war with my father. I used to laugh it off. I thought things would calm down after we walked down the aisle. I thought once vows were exchanged, my dad would finally step back. I was wrong. The wedding started beautifully. The sun came through the stained glass, the flowers lined the aisle perfectly, and for a moment, I thought maybe love could quiet all the tension. My father walked me down the aisle with his jaw tight but his hand steady. Michael waited at the altar, eyes soft, the way he looked at me when it was just the two of us. When they shook hands before the vows, I convinced myself it meant peace. The reception was where it all began to crack. Dad gave his speech first, holding his champagne glass high. He started with stories from my childhood, the kind that make people laugh and cry at the same time. Everyone was smiling until he turned his eyes toward Michael. His voice shifted. He said a man has to earn the right to be a husband, that marriage is a responsibility heavier than any job. He said he hoped Michael was ready to step up, because if not, he would always be there to protect me. The room chuckled politely, but I saw Michael's jaw tighten. Later, Michael gave his own toast. He wrapped his arm around me, called me his partner, his equal, his future. Then, almost too casually, he added that from now on, he was the only man whose opinion really mattered to me. The words hung in the air like smoke. My father's smile faltered. I tried to laugh it off, but I knew this wasn't going to pass quietly. By the time the cake was cut, the drinks had loosened every tongue. Dad confronted Michael near the head table, his voice low but sharp enough that people nearby turned their heads. I saw Michael lean in, his lips curling into the kind of smile he used when he wanted to provoke someone. Guests began whispering, sensing a storm. I left the dance floor and pushed through the crowd, but by the time I reached them, my father's fist had already connected with Michael's jaw. The crash of glass followed, someone's wine spilling across the table as chairs scraped back. Guests gasped and moved away, a half-circle forming around the two men who now stood nose to nose, my father red-faced with fury, Michael clutching his jaw but refusing to back down. For one frozen second, I couldn't breathe. My wedding had just become a spectacle, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. The room erupted into chaos before I could even process what had happened. My uncle rushed forward to grab my dad's arm, while Michael's best man stepped in front of him like a shield. My bridesmaids stood frozen, mouths open, their hands hovering in the air as if they could catch the disaster before it shattered completely. The photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether to keep shooting or respect the ruin of the moment. I pushed through the bodies, my dress dragging across spilled wine, my heels slipping against the polished floor. My father's face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before, veins rising in his neck, his teeth clenched so hard I thought they might crack. Michael, never one to step back from a challenge, wiped the blood from his split lip and smirked as if he had won something by taking the punch. That smirk lit the fire even brighter in my father's eyes. "Stop this, both of you," I said, my voice breaking as I forced myself between them. I pressed my palms against my dad's chest, but he barely moved. He was solid, planted, his glare locked on Michael like a hunter who had finally caught his prey. My husband's hand brushed my arm, and I turned just enough to see the defiance in his eyes. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to back down. Guests murmured around us, whispers spreading like ripples across water. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment, and a few even pulled out their phones as if the destruction of my marriage before it even began was a spectacle worth saving. My stomach churned, shame mixing with anger, because I knew this wasn't just an argument. This was every grudge, every unspoken word, every cut disguised as a joke, exploding in front of the people I had invited to celebrate love. My father's voice cut through the noise. He said Michael didn't deserve me, that I had made a mistake walking down the aisle, that I was too blind to see the kind of man I had married. His words were like knives, sharp and deliberate, thrown without hesitation. Michael laughed, a low bitter sound that drew gasps from the crowd. He said my father had lost control of me, that I wasn't his little girl anymore, that he should get used to not being the most important man in my life. The air snapped with tension. My dad shoved forward, and for a terrifying second, I thought another punch was coming. Michael squared his shoulders, ready to take it or give it back. My uncle and the best man held them apart, their arms straining as both men resisted, struggling to break free and finish what they had started. I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the one memory I would carry forever. Instead, it was collapsing in front of me, ruined by the two men who claimed to love me the most. I begged them to stop, my voice hoarse and shaking, but my words felt like whispers against a storm. Finally, my mother pushed through the crowd. She grabbed my father's arm with both hands, her face pale and lined with fury. She told him to look at me, to see what he was doing, to recognize that he was destroying his daughter's wedding. For a moment, her voice reached him. His chest rose and fell like a raging tide, but his eyes flickered toward mine, and I saw the guilt flash through them. Michael stepped back, adjusting his tie, his lip still bleeding. He looked at my dad with disdain, then turned his eyes on me. "This is what you married into," he said quietly, his voice heavy enough that the guests near us still heard. The shame in his tone felt deliberate, like he wanted the blame to land squarely on my father's shoulders. I stood frozen between them, my mind spinning. No vows, no rings, no blessings from the officiant could erase what had just happened. The fight wasn't just about words. It was about power, about who owned a piece of me, about who would win the right to be the man I leaned on. And in their battle, I realized I had already lost something I could never get back. As the crowd began to disperse, whispers trailing like smoke, my wedding day lay shattered at my feet. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The reception limped on like a wounded animal. The music returned, but softer now, like the band was afraid to wake the tension still thick in the air. Guests tried to laugh and chat, but the sound carried a nervous edge, their eyes darting toward me whenever they thought I wasn't looking. The dance floor stayed nearly empty. Plates of food sat untouched, and the wedding cake, perfect hours earlier, sagged in the corner like a forgotten prop. I sat at the head table with Michael beside me. He dabbed at his lip with a napkin, still smirking like he had claimed some kind of victory. My father had left, pulled away by my mother after another round of harsh words that I couldn't bear to repeat. The last thing I heard him say was that he would never bless this marriage. His voice cracked as he spoke, and the words landed heavier than the punch he had thrown. Michael leaned close and told me not to worry, that my dad would get over it. His tone was smug, as if my father's humiliation was just another wedding memory. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had provoked it, that he had pushed exactly where he knew it would hurt most. But I swallowed the words because arguing in that moment would have made the wreckage even worse. Family members came in waves, pulling me aside to whisper their opinions. My aunt told me my father had been wrong to cause a scene, that he should have respected the day. My cousin said Michael had disrespected my dad in front of everyone and that he deserved what he got. Every opinion felt like another stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. I nodded, smiled weakly, and returned to my seat, my head pounding. When it came time for the first dance, Michael pulled me onto the floor. His hands were firm on my waist, his eyes fixed on mine, but there was no romance in the moment. All I could feel were the stares around us. Some guests clapped half-heartedly, others just watched. The photographer lifted his camera again, but I knew the pictures would never capture joy. They would capture a bride forcing herself to hold it together while her new husband spun her in circles, his jaw still tight from a fight. After the dance, I slipped away to the restroom. My reflection in the mirror startled me. Mascara smudged at the corners of my eyes, lipstick faded, shoulders hunched. I looked less like a bride and more like someone at the end of a battle. I braced myself against the counter and tried to breathe, but every image from earlier replayed in my mind. My father's fist. Michael's smirk. The gasps of the crowd. The look on my mother's face when she dragged him out of the hall. When I returned, Michael was surrounded by his friends, laughing, raising glasses, celebrating as though nothing had happened. The sight made my stomach twist. It was like he had already chosen to rewrite the night, to bury the chaos under bravado. I knew then that the fight would never be forgotten, but he would never admit fault either. As the evening crawled to a close, guests began slipping out early. Some hugged me tightly, their faces soft with pity. Others avoided me altogether, rushing past with mumbled congratulations. By the time the band packed up, the hall was nearly empty. The decorations still sparkled, but the air was stale, weighed down by what had been lost. Michael and I left together, climbing into the car as cans clinked against the pavement behind us. The silence inside was deafening. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back to adjust my dress, pretending not to notice. I stared out the window as the city lights blurred past, my mind already chasing what the future would look like with this crack splitting the foundation of my marriage. At the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed while Michael stripped off his jacket and poured himself a drink from the minibar. He raised his glass and said, "Here's to us," like nothing had happened, like my father's absence was a footnote instead of a wound. I forced a smile, but inside I felt hollow. The man beside me was my husband now, yet all I could see was the image of him standing across from my father, daring him to strike, daring him to break us apart. The wedding day was over, but the damage was only beginning. The days after the wedding were not a honeymoon. They were damage control. My mother called me every morning, her voice hushed as if speaking too loudly might reopen the wound. She begged me to talk to my father, to find a way to mend things before the anger hardened into something permanent. Michael, on the other hand, told me to forget about it, to let my dad sulk until he came crawling back. Two voices, pulling me in opposite directions, and I stood in the middle, already exhausted. When I finally did call my dad, the phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was flat, and the warmth I had always known was gone. He said he would not apologize for protecting me. He said Michael had provoked him, humiliated him, dared him in front of everyone. I tried to explain that I needed peace, that I wanted both of them in my life, but his answer was simple. As long as Michael was my husband, he would keep his distance. Weeks turned into months, and the silence grew. Michael stopped bringing him up, but the bitterness remained in his tone whenever my father's name slipped into conversation. Family gatherings became battlegrounds of avoidance. My parents hosted dinners I attended alone, while Michael's family filled the holidays with pointed comments about how I should not expect respect from a man who had punched his son-in-law. Every celebration felt like a reminder that the wedding day had not been a beginning but a fracture. When our first anniversary came, I sat with Michael at a fancy restaurant, candles flickering between us, and all I could think about was that my father had not spoken to me in nearly a year. Michael lifted his glass to toast us, and I raised mine too, but my eyes stung. He smiled, proud, as if the absence did not matter, as if winning me away from my family was something to celebrate. 2 years later, when my daughter was born, I called my dad from the hospital. I thought maybe the news of his first grandchild would be the bridge that healed us. He answered, and for the first time in months I heard his voice break. He asked if she was healthy, if I was safe, but he did not come. He said he could not stand in a room with Michael, not after that night, not after the words exchanged. The call ended with silence, and I wept into the hospital pillow while Michael slept in the chair beside me. Time did not fix what happened. It calcified it. Every year that passed without my father holding his granddaughter deepened the canyon between us. Every holiday we spent divided left me wondering if love could really survive this kind of fracture. I blamed Michael for provoking him, for sneering when he should have kept quiet. I blamed my father for swinging first, for letting pride drown out love. And sometimes, late at night, I blamed myself for not stopping either of them before the damage was done. Now, when I look back at the wedding photos, I see more than flowers and dresses and smiling faces. I see the moment before everything cracked. I see myself standing between two men who both claimed to love me, but whose love was twisted by pride, control, and the need to be right. My wedding day was supposed to be the foundation of my marriage. Instead, it became the reason I lost the only man who had raised me, protected me, and given me away with trembling hands. I wish I could tell you there was closure, that my father eventually forgave Michael, or that Michael softened and apologized. The truth is simpler and sharper. My wedding day ended with a fight that split my family in two, and nothing since has healed it. Some wounds do not close, they simply become scars you learn to carry. And every time I remember the sound of that punch, echoing through the reception hall, I know that moment will haunt me longer than any vow or any promise ever could.